Welcome to a special series of the Empowered to Connect podcast, where we come together to discuss a healing-centered approach to engagement and well-being for ourselves, our families, and our communities. This is episode 2 of our special series on the war in Ukraine, entitled War and Resilience: How Ukrainians Are Teaching the World. If you missed episode 1, definitely go and check it out before listening here. If you've already listened to episode 1, here is episode 2. We pick back up with our conversation with Madison and Yuriy Perekotiy, talking about the generational resilience baked into the Ukrainian culture. How did it get here? How did it form? And what is it like? Here they are, Madison and Yuriy Perekotiy. You're growing up there. I mean, Madison, that's an incredible, I don't think I knew that statistic about there being 100 years of there not having been war through the generations. Yuriy, growing up, I mean, with a taste now on a different culture and maybe having a sense now of that not being the case in the U.S., for example, are you able to see or kind of pinpoint those things, looking back in your own story and see different things that were just routinely normal for you that might not be normal in other places in the world because of that exposure growing up?
I think just, this popular phrase in America, hurt people hurt. And I think that's true because both my grandparents, one been military vet, another one been prisoner of war. And I never understand quite was the heavy gravity of whatever they lived through, and the drinking of alcohol. And I think that's partially people just kind of like the Buddy Keep Score book, kind of people just been influenced, and then their generation growing up and the influenced by the hurt people who've been struggled. And then I growing up, I seen people coming back from Afghanistan, and it's weird. It's weird kind of make sure you hear about these people, and you can't always be behind kind of like an inclusion and PTSD stuff like that, because they just now start talking about how PTSD is a real thing. Because before there was just kind of people who come back from the war kind of thing. I don't know. It's hard to say because when you're there, you think it's normal. Yeah. Actually, you think maybe it's just a cultural thing. That's what we do. And now we know more, and it's just I have a lot of compassion to my parents and my grandparents, because I feel they did the best for whatever they have. Yeah. And I feel a lot of Ukrainians now struggle because simply it's not like they did not know anything better. They just cannot see anything better. They cannot see past this, I'm struggling. I'm home by myself. I'm mother of 3 and my husband is there, and I'm by myself in Romania, for example. Yeah. Yeah. And it is stressful. When Madison leaves somewhere, I'm staying with the kids. I can do it, but in the 5th day, you're like, oh man, I'm a little bit struggling. Right. So I always had a compassion towards the single parents, and especially if you have a added extra stress. Yeah. So my heart hurts, and I feel like there will be a lot of healing. I hope there's a lot of healing gonna come to Ukraine. Yeah. Because we're praying for the end of the war, but I know after the war it will be a lot of mountains to climb. Yeah. Yeah. Well, Madison, I'd love for you to share the story that you shared in the newsletter, which is the way that we got in touch with you to begin with, was I noticed, I won't tip the story, but I'd love for you to share that story and kind of the setting behind it of you guys in the camp. And would you mind sharing that story?
Yeah. So we are partners with Lifeline, and through our partners connected in Ukraine and Romania, a lot of our Ukrainian partners ended up going to Romania and working with these other partners. And so last summer, they were able to host 3 different camps for Ukrainian children who are refugees in Romania, for hundreds of kids. So we had a week-long experience working with some moms and kids, because, most of them, the dad's not there. If you have 3 kids or more under 18, or your child has special needs, then the dad can leave with the family. But most Ukrainians have 1 or 2 kids. 3 kids is a lot, and 4 kids is whoa. So yes, it is. We were a little bit weird when I would go to the grocery store with all my kids in Ukraine. So we had the opportunity to serve there in July, and then we were invited back in October. So I don't know if this is the one you're referring to, but I had two different opportunities on that trip in October to work with groups of refugees, Ukrainian refugees in Romania, and was able to put together I only had a couple hours each day with them, but really wanted to just help them understand what trauma is, that it's okay to say you've experienced trauma, and really help them understand how it influences the brain. And that just because they're not children doesn't mean they can't be influenced by what they've been through. And in this situation, it's ongoing trauma. So a lot of times when we talk about trauma, it's like a singular event, a singular rupture or something like that. And this is just ongoing and unknown. So living with that fear every day, or wondering if your son's going to die, and that's ongoing. So we had some really impactful times. We played some games, but then we talked in individual groups. I heard their stories, and just to be able, I felt honored that they would share with me. They didn't know me from Adam. I'm just the American girl who says I used to live in Ukraine, and my Russian's like, meh, it's fine. And they just drew me in, and the stories that they were telling me were shocking to hear. I was thinking about this one woman that I met. I talked to her for 15 minutes, and she said, yeah, we were living in the basement for 3 weeks. And my grandson got so sick that we were sure he was going to die of pneumonia. And that's when we decided to get out. And so they left and came to Romania, and he was in the hospital in the ICU for 2 weeks. I mean, this is a 5-year-old, and they'd been living in the basement for 3 weeks. And because of the mold and because of the cold, he got pneumonia. So there were a couple elderly women there I just thought, what you have lived through so much. Yeah. And now you're here wondering, is my son okay? Is my grandson okay? Because they're fighting. Yeah. There's grandmothers and moms there, now raising their kids or grandkids without any other parental influence because they wanted to get out. And I don't blame them. This woman was saying, she kind of said it in a funny way. She was laughing. And sometimes that is a way to deal with grief or trauma, is you have to find some joy. And she said, well, I was in my garden, and then I went out there the next day, and there was a bunch of missile shrapnel in there. And I thought, well, I guess I won't have potatoes this winter, so I better leave. So that was her way of coping with the situation, was recognizing her harvest would be not plentiful. So she must need to get out.
That was the marker that told her she needed to go.
Yeah.
Oh man. When you guys think about the families in, kind of from here and heading forward, and let's pray that the war is ending soon. What are the most immediate needs that you guys see? And maybe it could be practical needs that you're helping to cover through the War Fund, or that you're working to raise money for right now. And then when you think about those longer term structural needs, what might be some of the things you think of that we should have on our minds moving forward?
So one of the cool things was that, so I completed TBRI practitioner training right before we came to the States in 2021, and I was on the Eastern European cohort. So one of the positives of the pandemic is that it made it possible for them to do these TBRI trainings internationally over Zoom. Yeah. And I was in a group with all these other Ukrainians and people from Latvia and Romania and other places as well. But I know each of them have been working in whatever context they're in. And so definitely, there's going to be a need for more trauma-informed practitioners, whether it's with TBRI or something else, who can serve. We talked with a couple that we know, and I was asking, okay, what do you see are the needs, come 6 months from now? Because Yuriy and I we don't know what we're doing. We have no idea where God's going to put us. We don't know if we're supposed to stay here. We're supposed to go to Romania or back to Ukraine, Lord willing. And this couple that's living in Ukraine said, Madison, we just need people. We need people who are ready to do relational work and counseling, because aid is coming. Even, churches are doing a great job with aid. Ukrainian organizations are doing a great job with aid. It's getting there. People will get what they need. But the counseling, the one-on-one, the trauma groups, there's not enough people who know how to do that and are willing to live here. And so I think that's going to be a huge need to see, okay, God, how are you going to provide that? How are you going to provide that for the Ukrainians who fled, who live in Czech, who live in England, who live in America? Because that's going to be a need as well. So I think that's kind of on the trauma clinical side, one of the things that we're seeing. Do you want to talk about some of the more practical needs? I think like rebuilding, which is what our partners are working on, thinking about all these people who had their roofs torn off or their windows blasted out and it's cold. You want to talk about the winter project maybe?
It's kind of hard because there's the,
sorry. Hi. Can you build something with me? Sorry. She's our baby. So she's pretty irresistible. She's not a baby, but she's.
No. How old is she?
She's 3.
Okay. We've got a 5-year-old who plays that role for us.
Yeah. And I don't know if we'll have any more. And so we're just soaking it all up and her little eyes. Yeah. So he'll be back. I hope that's okay. I'm sure you can edit.
Sure. Yeah, for sure.
Where we go. Was that the story I was talking about? I hope that's what you were mentioning. I was trying to think if it was that. So good. Okay. He's got us.
Okay. So Yuriy, one of the things that I saw in y'all's newsletter recently is the winter project. And this is probably a very ignorant thing to have to clarify, but so for example, we're in Memphis, Tennessee. We have sort of a winter sometimes. Ukraine has real winter, and that's a real challenge if you have no roof or have no windows anymore. So we share about the project you guys are a part of.
So to contextualize, basically make a vision, and if you look on the globe, we're kind of on the same line with the New Jersey. So we have 4 seasons. And right now, if you notice it, the strategy of Russia is not just trying to win on the battlefield, but also just create mass mayhem. They started bombing the power plants, the water systems and everything. And so a lot of people can be 300 miles from the front line, no soldiers should be, but there will be no power for like a whole week possibly, or it will be power like for 2 hours in the morning maybe. And so in the light of that, you start thinking about, okay, if you live in a house, possibly maybe you can make some campfire or something like that, kind of like surviving. Because if you have a real winter and even you have a clothing, but you have no heat, period, and may possibly no water, so your life starts getting like a little bit problematic because to even get your bucket of water, like 5 gallons of water, you need to go somewhere to fill it up and come back home. Right. So a lot of logisticals there, and even if you have no hole in the roof because the missile hit you, you're just gonna almost freeze to death because there's no means. So we trying to work with our Ukrainian partners, trying to help them to pay for the go in there and chop some wood, some lumber to bring to these families and just kind of give them the most needed things. Or even, for example, even if you bring wood, sometimes you need the stove to bring something to your home and stick it to the window so it's end up with heat.
Yeah, so we kind of launched a project a couple months ago, but winter will last until April in Ukraine, and so we're continuing to send funds to our partners for these huge trucks of firewood. And then you have to think about, it can't just be wood; it has to be wood that can be either already chopped or that like an elderly person could physically pick that piece up. So that puts some more criteria in there. Stoves, installation, fuel is really expensive right now. So fuel to actually drive out to these places and install it. So we're working with 2 different partners, continually doing that. It costs about $100 for a stove, and it costs about $50 for a month's supply of wood. And so that's what we've been doing with the War Fund for the most part.
Right now in the winter.
Yeah, so that's at warrelieffund.org. And you can, if you feel led to give or contribute in any way, we're so grateful. And just know that everything that's given, we get accounted for by our partners and by Globe. And so we just want to be, above reproach with that as well. But we're also supporting different families because there's a lot of families that have, maybe the dad lost employment because of the war. And so then they have no income. And so we're actually on a monthly basis supporting 7 families right now in Ukraine with income. And so that's an ongoing need that we have as well.
Guys, what do y'all, and Madison first and Yuriy, what do you guys want the average person who's listening, not in Ukraine right now, what do you want them to know kind of in closing? You want them to know about, Yeah. What do you want them to know about Ukraine and how they can be involved going forward, or anything in general?
I think our biggest request would be that, if you are a believer, to be praying for Ukraine, to be praying for churches in Ukraine, praying for people to stay strong. I think that from our perspective, it's really easy to forget about the struggles that they're going through, because we're just living life here day to day in a comfortable place for most of us. I want parents to know that if their kids are asking about the war, just to remind them that they're safe, they're in a safe place, that it's a reminder for them to think about and pray for other Ukrainian kids, or learn a little bit more about Ukraine. Who knows what seeds are being planted in your child's heart if they're thinking about Ukrainian kids. So I think that ultimately we want to see healing brought to Ukrainians. And, for us as Christians, that is eternal healing by coming to know Jesus. But also there's a lot of healing to be done from all the trauma of this. And that is going to take years. It's going to take people. It's going to take people not forgetting about Ukraine and continuing to invest. I don't mean just financially, but in resources and resourcing others who are able to go. So we hope that there's a lot of healing coming, and we hope that the war ends really soon.
Yeah. Yuriy?
Yeah. And I think also what I'm praying almost daily, it's about mercy. Mercy, yes, God save us, mercy, but also a lot of Ukrainians now are just getting very angry. And they have this, they're visualizing their enemy is Russians. So there's a lot of justifiable maybe anger, but I hope God's gonna spread this mercy to the people, and people eventually start learning to give mercy too, because there's a lot of wishes for vengeance. It's like that's what people are hoping.
Yeah.
And I hope just people kind of, even if you bring vengeance, it's not going to bring you healing. So that's kind of problem for now, because we cannot change the war. We cannot stop the war. We can patch the roofs. We can bring the firewood. But it's all Band-Aids. So I hope eventually God's going to work on people's hearts, and maybe just give a safe place in people kind of to process what happens to them.
Yeah.
Well, I think just to add on real quick to that, there's a real opportunity here for when we're talking about vulnerable children, the orphanage system and all of that. There's a real opportunity for those things to change. This war has created more orphans. Okay, what does that look like going forward? And our hope is that the Ukrainian government will begin to take advice and directions from, like, for example, the Polish government actually has an excellent social services system, and it's right next door to Ukraine. Take advice from, experts from whatever country, that things would shift so that future generations in Ukraine grow up with a different story. And part of that is on those of us serving in Ukraine, on the church, on individual families and choices that we make. And part of that's on the policy level. And, I'm not that person. I'm not Ukrainian, so I'm not going to be up there chummy with President Zelensky talking about law changes. I mean, that would be cool, but it's probably not me. However, maybe there are people who need to be empowered or educated. And if, people listening have that knowledge or the ability to, sponsor people who can do that, I mean, that would be huge. So I think that's our big hope. Let's not default back to the system we had because it wasn't serving children and families well. Let's try to repair and reunite families that have been separated. And I add one more thing. I'm sorry, I don't want to end on a sad note, but a lot of children have been deported to Russia from those eastern areas. Like, we're talking thousands of children separated from Ukrainian family members. And so we just constantly are thinking about them and praying that the Lord would just be merciful and gracious to them wherever they end up. And they may end up in an okay situation in a family, but just so much separation, so much loss. It's going to take years and decades to process.
Well, and I don't want to just end on that.
Sorry.
Why? Like, what was the purpose behind that? Was that like a Russian thing? Was that something where people are sending their kids across the border for safety? Talk about.
It's forcible evacuations of people in general. So, like, if you have a whole orphanage boarding school, it's got several hundred kids, and this whole town is being forcibly evacuated. They're not, what are they going to do? Tell them no, that the kids can't go anywhere else. So this is just people being forcibly evacuated into Russian territory out of those war zones in the East. So there's a lot of really tough things happening. But I think, like what Yuriy said, it's so important that I mean, we can't get true vengeance, and that's not gonna heal those relationships at all.
Yeah. I want to ask one more question. So, well, two more questions, I guess. One would be, what would be your advice for people wanting to follow along with the news and follow along with what's going on and get accurate kind of stories? Have y'all found, there's one kind of either American news outlet or an English speaking news outlet that they can get reliable information from?
Yeah, so there's a couple. I follow them on social media, but I'm sure they all have websites too. But the Kyiv Independent posts in English updates every day. Radio Svoboda.
Voice of Freedom.
Voice of Freedom Radio.
Okay.
They have English YouTube channels and English Instagram. I can send you the links to these, but
Sure.
those would be really good ones to follow. I find that they're very diligent in their reporting, and I find that BBC has good logistical updates as well. Whenever there's movement, troop thing, those kinds of things, they're pretty on top of that.
Okay. Last question to hopefully end on somewhat of a hopeful or a positive note. We have organizationally a mutual friend named Raya, who you guys are friends with as well, who's doing a lot of work with the Care and Purpose Institute. Do you want to share about y'all's relationship and maybe the work that she's doing there? And then maybe we'll hear from her soon.
Yeah, that would be a great connection to make. We met Raya. How long ago was that? I met
her in 2009 when we visited the Ochidom.
Yeah, we went and visited her where she was working in Kyiv at their foster group home. So they had this home called Father's House where they housed individual foster families with children in them. And we went and met with her there just because we were curious about that type of work. So that's been a little while. And we reconnected whenever I applied to the TBRI training for people in Eastern Europe, and was able to walk through that program. And she's kind of been the person touching base with the Institute and on that training. So she's got the connections as well as her team, because they were doing, Hope Connection camps, those kinds of things in Kyiv. We had even talked about, I was like, okay, great. Let me know the camp dates for 2022, because I'll come up to Kyiv. I want to observe this. I've seen them in English, but I want to watch them in Russian or be a buddy and actually practice that in a different in my second language. And so those were the plans that everybody had, was to go back and do these normal, quote unquote, ministry things for us. And so obviously none of that happened, but we kind of have hope for the future.
Yeah.
Maybe. We'll see.
Awesome. Guys, thank you for making time. Thanks for sharing your stories. And we're going to link all of the We're Really Fun and stuff you shared in the show notes so people can look it up there. Tell us where we can follow you on social media for more updates.
Yeah, so we're on Instagram at the Perekotiys. It's hard to spell, but I will make sure it's linked in the show notes for you guys. My maiden name was Hall, and I thought that was boring, so I ended up as Perekotiy. But it's pretty appropriate because it means to tumble. So it's half the word for tumbleweed. So we're just tumbling around the world. It's fitting for our lives.
Awesome. Well, guys, thank you so much.
Thank you. We appreciate it.
You've been listening to War and Resilience, How Ukrainians Are Teaching the World, a production of Empower to Connect Media.